Hi, on today's Cracking Addiction, learn how strong social connections can build resilience and discover why loneliness is even deadlier than smoking and drinking. So I want to first talk about the effects of loneliness. Loneliness is not just a difficult emotion that we go through. There are specific physiological effects. In the context of substance use disorder and addictions, we know that people who experience loneliness actually use more substances. So when you're lonely, you resort back to your tried and tested coping mechanisms. So it's a significant risk factor for relapse and increased use. But it also increases your risk of suicide, stroke, heart attacks, dementia, death, all-cause mortality, healthcare utilization, reduced immunity, and also impaired sleep, and it affects sleep architecture. So it's, I go back to the basic point. Loneliness is not just an emotion. It's not something that you can shake off. It's something that you actually have to address. It's certainly not something that you can address with social media. We know that social media actually increases rates of anxiety, depression, and fear of missing out. And it's certainly not a replacement for social connection, real life connection with other people. One of the lead investigators for the Harvard study, Robert Waldinger, he's a psychiatrist in Massachusetts General Hospital. He actually says that loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. So let's remind ourselves, smoking kills half of all smokers, and people who drink excessively have been estimated to die 21 to 35 years younger than their age-matched controls who don't drink excessively. So that's the baseline. And what Robert Waldinger is saying is that loneliness is actually worse than that. So just put that into context. And I've already said that loneliness is actually associated with an increased mortality, but breaking that down, we see that social isolation increases all-cause mortality by 29%. Feeling lonely increases all-cause mortality by 26%, and living alone increases mortality by 32%. So it's not something to be trivialized, it's something to be taken very seriously. Now, I want to talk to you about Teflon Man. Teflon Man is this concept that there are some people who are just born lucky and who are able to just shake off all the slings and arrows of adversity that life throws at them without any apparent ill effects. And they actually tried to investigate this, and they did this in the Grant study that has then become the Harvard study. And they worked out that actually Teflon Man doesn't exist. Everybody experiences distress. Everyone experiences trauma in their life. Everyone is affected by the slings and arrows of adversity. But the difference is that the people with the stronger, better relationships, the people who had close social connection, they seem to get through it better than the ones without. So actually Teflon Man doesn't exist, but people who look as if they're Teflon, they still experience the same tribulations and pain that everyone else does, but they've got better resilience and they're able to cope better with loss and pain because of the quality of their social connections. Now, the Harvard study had a number of really interesting findings from it. And I'll go through a couple of these. So firstly, financial success depends on the warmth of relationships, not on intelligence. So those who scored highest on measurements of warm relationships earned, on average, $141,000 a year more at their peak salary, which is usually between the ages of 55 and 60. Now remember, this is a study in the States of Harvard undergraduates that started in the 1930s. So we're having to think about US levels of remuneration, and we're thinking about it in terms of dollar values. And they also found that there was no significant difference in the maximum income earned by men with IQs in the range of 110 to 115 versus men who had an IQ versus 150. So IQ does not determine final salary. Friendship does. The ability to form social connection does. They also found that political mindedness correlated with intimacy. Aging liberals have more sex. That was the headline. The most conservative men, they ceased sexual activity at an average of 68, whereas liberal voters had an active sex life well into their 80s. And men with relationship satisfaction were healthier in old age. So people in their 50s who enjoyed their relationships were more physically healthy when they got to 80. So again, friendship determines the quality of life well into old age. Now, there's more. In this study, they found that having an alcohol use disorder was a very negative effect on life and longevity and health span. So alcoholism was the main cause of divorce between the men studied and their wives, and strongly correlated with neurosis, the tendency to experience negative emotions, and depression following alcohol use. And together with cigarette smoking, alcohol use or misuse was the single greatest contributor to early morbidity and death in this particular cohort. So let's just put this into context. So alcohol and tobacco use were identified as significant factors that impacted upon the health of the men studied in this study. But loneliness was worse than that. Now, if we look at relationships again, the interesting thing about their relationships with their mothers was that the warmth of childhood relationships with their mothers was found to matter long into adulthood. So men who had warm childhood relationships with their mothers earned more. They earned approximately $87,000 more a year than men whose mothers were uncaring. Men who had poor childhood relationships with their mothers were much more to develop dementia when they'd reached old age. And late in professional lives, the men's boyhood relationships with their mothers, but not with their fathers, were associated with effectiveness at work. And the warmth of childhood relationships with mothers had no significant bearing on life satisfaction at 75 or beyond. So we're seeing quite a nuanced picture. And then if we move on to relationship with fathers, the warmth of childhood relationships with fathers correlated with lower rates of adult anxiety, greater enjoyment of vacations, and increased life satisfaction at the age of 75. So hopefully this puts into context the harmful effects of loneliness and the positive effects of social connection over time. And I just want to make a few more points on social connection. So we know that it's all about real life social connection. It's not about social media. I've already said that social media causes significant adverse health impacts to mental health. We know that happiness is contagious to 3 degrees. So if I'm happy and I know someone, then he's going to be more happy and he knows someone, and she's going to be more happy and she knows someone and he's going to be more happy just because I'm happy. That's 3 degrees of contagion. So happiness is actually contagious to 3 degrees because of the power of social connection. Social connection has been proven to increase longevity, the quality of life, one's personal resilience, the ability to achieve better than expected outcomes, despite the hand that life deals with you, improved mental health, and survival. We know that social connection improves survival by up to 50%. And compare that with social connection within social media, which actually impacts upon mental health and reduces social connectivity. Can't emphasize the point enough. We need real life friends. Now, we don't need lots of them. We just need a couple, but we do need those relationships. So when we're thinking about, assessing loneliness, it's quite challenging to actually ask someone, do you feel lonely? And if they do, they're probably not going to say it out first. So questions that I ask include, well, do you have companionship? Do you feel left out of social events and gatherings? Do you feel isolated? And then I might ask, do you feel lonely? So we're talking about this funneling question style. And when we're thinking about the management of poor social connection, we need to think about cognitions. There are 3 key cognitions that really impact upon our ability to relate to other people and our ability to establish social connection. First of all, it's cynicism. Then there's a lack of trust, and then there's self-consciousness. So cynicism, there's no point. Everyone's out to get me. Everyone's horrible. No one likes me. A lack of trust. Well, it's very hard to actually establish social connections without sharing one's vulnerabilities, and that requires trust in the other individual, and then self-consciousness, embarrassment, shyness, the thing that holds us back from saying hello for the first time. We then also have to support opportunities for social contact, and that leads us into this idea of social prescribing, whereby clinicians need to be connecting patients with social opportunities such as volunteer work or such as social services. People need social support to actually engage in social connection. Sometimes people need, just a simple example would be, being picked up by someone with a wheelchair adaptable car is able to take someone who's wheelchair bound to a social event. That's the kind of social support we're talking about there. And then, of course, finally, we need to teach people the social skills to actually engage in small talk to begin with, but then that can actually lead to social connection. So people need to be taught how to actually interact with one another. And it's a sad thing to say that this is the truth, but, I think we're living more in a society now where we find it so much more easy to write on a keyboard and express our views on a keyboard than we do to actually look someone in the eye and talk to them about how we feel or what we think on a particular issue. So how does this correlate with addiction? Well, Johann Hari said the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, but it is social connection. And so I think we need to be leveraging peer support. Everyone, I believe, has made in their life at least one poor choice because of peer pressure. So peer pressure, we have to acknowledge its potency. But not only is it a potent force for poor decision-making, it can also be manipulated into being a potent force to make the right choices. So if we are aspiring to a new behavior, then surely it is better for us to engage in relationships with peers for whom that new behavior is their normality. So if you want to be fit, then hang out with fit people. If you want to be abstinent, then hang out with abstinent people. If you want to eat well, then hang out with people who eat well. So the question then we need to ask ourselves is, does our peer group facilitate addiction, or does it facilitate recovery and social connection? We then need to think about, well, how do we change our peer groups? Well, peer support groups are a start. Going to 12 steps or, like AA or NA, or going to Smart Recovery, that is a start. It's a way of actually getting access to peer support and the new normality that we would otherwise be excluded from in the early phases of our recovery. And I need to make the point that recovery is a social endeavor. It takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to be in recovery, and there are certainly no lone rangers in recovery. And I think not only do we need to think about our social connection with our peers and our friends and the people that are going to actually, listen to us when we're sad, call us when we're feeling lonely, help us out when we're feeling stressed, and be there for us when we're thinking about relapse. But I think we also need to consider the professional relationships that we need to have with people. And I think of the totality of this concept as the famous 5. So we need to have very good relationships with our general practitioner, with our addiction specialist, be that an addiction medicine specialist or an addiction psychiatrist. We need to have professional relationships with our psychologist or our counselor. And then we need relationships with our accountability partner and our sponsor. So an accountability partner is someone who's going to hold us accountable to all the things that we say we're going to do. Someone that we're going to go jogging with at 6 o'clock in the morning before we go to work. It's someone that we're going to have fun with or socialize with without alcohol. And our sponsor, well, that leads back to this concept of needing to attend peer support groups. If we're talking specifically about 12-step groups, a lot of the work in the 12 steps is actually done one-on-one in a relationship between an individual who's trying to achieve abstinence and the sponsor. The work happens outside the actual meeting. So I think of 12-step groups, or rather the meetings of 12 steps, purely as a forum in which you can meet a sponsor to then engage in 12-step work. And when we think about peer support groups, I see I hear people talk about the fact that they feel that it's not for them. I think when I hear that, I think that people are judging. And I think that judgment causes separation. If you look for differences between you and other people who are trying to achieve abstinence, then you will find those differences. But if you look for points of common ground, then you will find that common ground. And I think the easiest common ground to look for is our shared experience of suffering and our shared experience of love. We all have suffered and we all have loved. And in fact, sometimes our love causes our suffering. But that's the realm of poets. So if we look for that common ground, if we do away with judgment and we actually embrace our common ground, our common connection with our fellow man, then that is a way of unlocking the power of social connection for abstinence. And really, it's been said to me, and I think this is true, if you attend enough groups, eventually you will hear what you need to hear. And I hope you've heard what you needed to hear today. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.